The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will start shortly.
Order. So, good morning everyone and welcome to the second oral session for the UK Youth Select Committee investigating knife crime. My name is Rachel Ojo and I'm the chair of this year's UK Youth Select Committee, and I'll just invite the other members to introduce themselves.
My name is Susanna Single and I am the vice chair of this year's Youth Select Committee.
Hi, I'm Jack.
My name is James.
I'm Ewan.
Hi, I'm Charlie.
I'm Billy.
Hi, I'm Chris.
Hi, I'm Jordan.
Hi, I'm Hosna.
And hi, I'm Theo.
So thank you very much for our panellists coming in to provide us with evidence. But before we start, could you each briefly introduce yourselves and the work you do relating to knife crime?
First and foremost, apologies for the slight tardiness. My name is Quarbs. I'm from a company called Mixtape Madness. On the face of it, we don't address knife crime, as it were. We're more a music platform, and I guess the reason why I've been called here is because quite a lot of drill content that's connected to knife crime has probably come up on your radar. But that being said, we have various initiatives that we do with young people, such as Talks, which takes place bi-monthly, which helps young people get careers into alternative industries, as it were. So in a way, by trying to eradicate a poverty of ambition, we feel we're addressing knife crime.
Yeah, Sheldon Thomas, former gang member. I run an organisation called Gangs Line. I don't talk about knife crime because it's not separate to gangs. I'm not quite sure why we keep talking about knife crime as if it's separate to gangs. But that's more political, I'm assuming. The work that we do is quite well known. We engage gang members. We have done since 1989 when I came out of gangs. We didn't have an organisation then, obviously. So it was just me going around the country engaging gang members up and down in Manchester and Liverpool. We now run an organisation that was set up in 2007 where we do mentoring, one-to-one mentoring. We go into schools to do gangs prevention workshops in all of the schools, whether it be a Peru, college, secondary school. We also teach or train teachers, police officers, NHS staff, mental health workers in understanding gang mentality, because it's not the same as a young person involved in ASB, antisocial behaviour. So there's a certain gang mentality or mental state of mind, the way gang members think, which is completely different to normal training that your officers or probation officers may have. So that's what Gangsline does.
Hi everybody, my name's Carly Thomas. I'm the senior caseworker at St Giles Trust. I'm working on the Rescue and Response Project, which is a County Lines Pan London project. I want to take this moment really to have a moment's silence, to be honest with you guys, for the amount of young people that we have lost through serious youth violence, including knife crime, over the past year. So if we could just take that moment for a second, and I will be obviously sharing my work, my experiences, my lived experience as we go on. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just go on to the first question, which I'll present to the whole panel. So the first question is, there seems to be an ongoing debate on the role of music in youth violence. Are certain types of music inciting violence, or are they useful means of young people expressing themselves? What are your opinions?
Well, music, not all music incites violence, we'll share on that. But there are certain record labels that have an agenda. I'm going to use myself as an example. Before most of you in this room was even born, I was signed to a recording label that wanted me to talk about my life as a gang member, that wanted to push this gangster image. In those days it wasn't called trap and drill, because that didn't exist. It was called gunman lyrics, which was based in reggae music sound system. So there's been a history of recording companies that want to push a certain agenda, push a certain kind of music for their own monetarian point of view. Today, what we have is a completely different, which is young people are more in control of their music because they don't need to be signed to a recording label. You can buy equipment for less than £5,000, set it up in your house, and you can record an album just as good as an album that costs £150,000. So when I was spending, not me personally, the record label was spending X amount of thousands on my album, these young people can make an album for far less than that with good quality, and they can make videos far less cheaper than the videos out there, and which looks just as good as a professional video. So that's what we're up against. What I would say is there is a small percentage of recording artists that claim to be rappers or drill artists when actually they're drug dealers. And there are certain platforms that are pushing these drug dealers, assuming most of the artists that make trap and drill in London are, I would say, is 95% black kids who push a certain style of music. Now, not every one of them are gang members, but a vast majority of them that get the big hits and subscriptions on YouTube are gang members, and they promote this kind of certain lifestyle, which then cause a rivalry with other gang members. Now, there are going to be people that will disagree with that because they have ulterior motives. They're either in the music industry themselves, they want to go far with their company, so everybody wants to turn a blind eye. But there's been a 10-year study of listening to by a professor that looked at what happens to a 10 to 15-year-old or 10 to 16-year-old who listens to violent music on a regular basis. And it's been proven that that person's behavior will change and will mimic what he or she is hearing. So unfortunately, I do believe there's a small percentage of trap and drill music that is not only causing the rivalry amongst young people in gangs, and so to speak, you want to talk about knife crime, but underpins it by pretending to be a rapper when actually they're drug dealers.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, believe it or not, I do actually agree with quite a lot of what Sheldon has mentioned, and I think one thing that he stated that is very important is the historical context of so-called violent music and working class communities, right? So it hasn't just sprung up from this so-called drill generation. It has been there for decades upon decades, as it were. Even if we're going as far back as the 80s. So it is to some degree unfair to kind of lament this present drill generation with being, I don't know, pioneers in violent music. A kind of quick example just in my lifetime. So initially, and kind of what inspired me to create a music platform is initially I used to listen to a platform called Heat FM, where all of us as local young people would go there to maybe MC and so on and so forth. Now, these sorts of environments, there is an element of freedom of expression. So the type of person that maybe we're quick to maybe label as a gang member or a drug dealer, growing up in certain communities or environments, the line can be very blurred, right? So certain people, there's people, for example, that I've met that could technically, by legal definition, fit in the term as a gang member, but they're also at university. I think in terms of music and violence, or music being used as a greater good, I think the bottom line for me is that, especially with this generation that we have now, they kind of choose their heroes, as it were. So, for example, I can upload a gospel track on the platform, I can upload a drill track on the platform. I don't put any marketing budget behind either of them. If the drill track does significantly better than the gospel track, that's based on the democracy of those young people, of that generation. I feel that we have to be careful that as a young person or as a teenager, as many of you will be able to kind of comprehend, the aim is never to be, your parents don't define what's cool to you, right? So if mum says don't listen to this, that's not necessarily going to stop you listening to that. You want to engage in what your peers engage in. And so young people, it's got to a stage where, as Sheldon has illustrated, they've got the resources to create all of this themselves. And last year, because of police pressures, a lot of the record labels actually turned away from drill artists. And what happened with those particular drill artists is that they just independently started to make traction in the charts, independently started to collaborate with artists from the US, and independently started to kind of gain success, as it were. So I fundamentally believe that, as with all things, as with social media platforms as well, music, as with social media platforms, can be used for positive and can be used for negative. If young people are conveying what they depict as their narrative, or a narrative that they can connect with, then our responsibility as a society is to kind of delve deeper and find out what is causing them to connect with that narrative. And I can only speak, so for example, my origin is from Tottenham, right? There hasn't been a year of my life where I haven't been exposed to youth violence. So to some degree, there's a normalization of youth violence, let alone the generation that's come up below me. So many young people, before they know how to put out a CV, the reality is we learn how to bag O's of weed. That's not from music, that is from our local environment. People that make it from our local environment aspire to get out of the area. So therefore, even when we talk about, so I feel that music comes further along in the food chain, as it were. And as Sheldon has illustrated prior, there's been generations of young people from urban environments that have digested urban music. But the only difference now is they've got a larger platform and larger reach. So then on the flip side, the majority of their consumers have no connection to youth violence or anything to that degree, as it were. And many of the young people that I've had the pleasure of working with, I know for a fact that the problems delve much deeper than music. I work with 20-year-olds plus who don't have soft skills, that don't know how to put together a CV or anything to that effect. So I feel that there's fundamental social problems at play here. And to put you in the context of a drill rapper, a lot of them face this conundrum, right? They want to pursue music, but in trying to pursue music, they know that it's at a risk of their own safety. And so now, when they were taking, so even to the extent that even in terms of traveling, they know it's a risk. So although Sheldon made a point that many gang members may choose to engage in music, I'm not particularly sure what Sheldon would say are the reasons why. There are quite I feel a larger percentage of young people that genuinely want to make a better avenue for their lives using music, and they're literally reflecting their narrative, as it were. Like when young people are rapping and they're naming tens of friends that have passed away, that's before music. That's a reality before music. Sorry if I spoke longer than expected.
Thank you. So I have to agree with the guys on a lot of areas that they've discussed. For me, the route goes deeper than this. This is a platform for our young people. They're trying to tell us how they're feeling. They're not just trying to incite violence. They're not just trying to, cause more grief on road. They're not trying to necessarily fight this gang. They're trying to talk about how they're feeling. So we need to look at why they're feeling like that. We need to look further back. They didn't, these young people, they've got a lot of skills. They've got a lot of talent. We don't take that into account. We just hear what they're saying. We talk about the violence that they're inciting. For me, again, it comes down to a lack of funding again. Like if we had the studios that we had 10 years ago, if we had the services that our young people could act, maybe they're not going to be making homegrown music in their own houses. Maybe they're going to have, more guys like these two that are going to be able to support them, to see them, to kind of advise them, okay, if you're going to write this down, if you're going to spit these lyrics, then this is going to come back at you. There's a chance that, someone is going to be knocking at your door. There's a chance that you're at risk, etc., etc. But we don't allow our young people to have a platform. Like, it's amazing that you guys are here today. You have a platform. The young men that I work with, they don't have a platform. Their platform is music. And this is a heartbreaker. They feel that they've been left, and they feel that this is the only way to get their opinions out there. Now, the media, they don't necessarily help. We know that. They don't want to talk about anything positive to do with our young people. They just want to talk about the violence that they're inciting. And majority, they're talking about young black males. And it's very, very, very frustrating because they do have talent. I sat with a young man yesterday. We're taking him to a radio station in a couple of weeks just to let him know what it's like to be in that kind of environment where people aren't smoking weed, they're not drinking, they're not getting off their face. It's a professional environment. I want him to have a taste of that, not in somebody's backyard, not in somebody's kitchen, not in somebody's bedroom. I want him to know that also he has these skills, he has these prospects, he can go anywhere he likes with them. But what I have had to discuss with him, that anything that we do put out on the radio, we have to be very careful. I don't want to leave that radio station and we've got 20 young men that have just heard his track waiting outside the front with shanks and machetes and all sorts to get him. So we've been looking at, what content he can write. He's not just thinking about violence and murder and anger every day. He's got a younger brother that he absolutely adores. He can write about that. He can talk about how he feels hard done by the government, how he doesn't have any access to funding to go and do the things that he should be allowed to do as a 14-year-old male. He doesn't have those, So I think we need to be looking at the bigger picture and see what the root is behind it.
Thank you.
Sorry to add, she actually mentioned a very important point, because even in relation to radio, a drill track is very difficult for a drill track to get on radio due to heavy censorship.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. I submit tracks based on my experience. So
not anymore. Minimum. That's the reason
Are
why
we talking
that's-
talking about mainstream radio?
Yeah,
As in
we
BBC
are.
One Extra,
We're
Capital
talking-
Extra?
Yeah, we are, and that's a problem. I mean, I would say,
Yeah.
into what? Obviously, we all agree on a certain principle, but unfortunately, mainstream radio is now trying to get involved in trap and drill. And those radio stations that are promoting it should look within themselves, because they are literally bringing in guys with ski masks, filming it, putting it out on YouTube, making everybody get excited. I mean, I've been told I can't mention their names, so I won't mention their names. But what I'm saying is this, is that they are promoting trap and drill. And the part they are promoting, these particular radio station, who are well known, they're literally bringing in guys who are wearing ski masks. And to point what Carly was saying about the content, they're just allowing anything to be said. And what Carly's talking about is where adults would come into the situation who've lived this lifestyle, like Carly and myself. I'm not sure if you was on road, but I'm just not going to assume that.
Thank you.
But I know Carly's told me that, so I can mention that. But people who have lived this lifestyle, who were signed, I was signed, but way before these guys were born, I was signed. But I refused to write about gunman lyrics because I didn't want people to be incited because I did bad things. Now, record companies don't get involved with young guys, but the radio station are now literally promoting guys. If you go on YouTube, you can see them. It's a list of guys who come on either with ski mask, and if it ain't ski mask, they come on and they're literally inciting violence to the point. This is the point that Carly was saying. So I think, yes, we have to look deeper than the music. Of course we do, because there are social factors which we're going to talk about later. Because music is just a symptom of this situation. It's just a symptom. It's like a way out for them to release their frustration. But the frustration is what's causing the mayhem on the street, and we have to recognise that.
So once again, I don't want to take anything away from what Sheldon has said. So I can only speak from my experience. The major, in terms of the percentage of drill tracks that actually make it to mainstream radio stations, is very, very small. Even when they do make it to mainstream radio station, the drill track is literally butchered because there's so much stuff they have to bleep or blur and so on and so forth, right? So the drill track, and a lot of the popular drill tracks now that do end up on radio, is a result of the fact that they've managed to amass such a massive consumer demand. That means radio ignores the track, but because so many people are listening to it online, they have to try and find a palatable way to put that song on radio that meets the because Ofcom have been extremely aggressive on the radio stations as well, and every time they put a song that's a bit too left of centre, then they face a massive fine. On top of that, me personally, in terms of rappers that I know have been associated with some level of gang violence, I always have to ask the rappers, what is your CBO? A CBO is a criminal behaviour order. Many rappers have criminal behaviour orders that state that they can't even mention specific gangs.
Can I just stop you there?
Yeah.
So we're going to have to move on to the next question now.
No
but
worries.
before we do that, I just wanted to remind you all that today's proceedings are not covered by privilege. So if you could please refrain from mentioning names of individuals or companies. Okay, thank you. So I'll pass on to James to ask the next question.
My question is also to the whole panel, and is there any evidence that gang culture, social media, and or music impact young people's involvement in knife crime?
Percent. I don't know what do you mean. What do you mean you need evidence? It's just out there. We've had over 400 murders. What do you mean? It's quite simple. I mean, I don't know why we have to sit and say evidence. The fact is, social media does impact on the way young people, as Kwame quite rightly said, we're in a different world. In my days, there was no such thing as a computer or a mobile phone. There was no such thing as police knowing anything. There was no such thing of anything like that. But today, we're in a world of social media. and social media plays a major role in how young people see themselves and how young people see life. They will listen to somebody chat some rubbish on there and take that in more than listening to their parents. That's a fact. In fact, the facts of what you're just asking, I'll just shed some stats on that for you. The average dad, if the kids have a dad, and I said if, they spend with their child is 34 minutes a day. The average mum spends 1 hour a day. The average child between the ages of 13 and 25 spends 9 hours a day on social media. The average child between 8 and 12 spends 6 hours a day in media. Who do you think's raising the children? We're in a world where parents are not raising their children. All those parents that came on TV last year who were talking about how their sons have been murdered, 90% of their sons were gang members, but they would have you believe they weren't. Because I'm going to tell you about parenting. Parenting has changed. Most parents don't spend a lot of time with their children. But you know what a gang member told me? A gang member said, when you don't spend time with your child, we will. That's why gangs are able to groom children. So in my days, you couldn't groom children. When I was a gang leader, it was unheard of to groom a child. Completely unheard of. It was unheard of to exploit a girl. Completely unheard of. If you exploited a girl or sexually abused a girl, you wouldn't see out the week, because there was a code and an ethic that gangs in the 70s and 80s lived by, which was, you do not groom children. You don't ask children to do your dirty work. Today, those morals and ethics have been gone for years. So gang members groom children because most of those children are not loved at home by a parent, because most of these young kids, if you look at the murder rate last year, and if you look at the kids in Feltham, Cookenwood, Pentonville, and you look into Brixton, 72% of them have no fathers. 72% have got no relationship with their dads. Most of them who had stepdads didn't have a good relationship with the stepdad. So we're in a situation where if a child is not parented, social media will parent your child. So to answer your question, does it have an impact? Absolutely.
James, could you kindly answer the question again, please?
I think he answered the question.
But could you just ask it again?
Is there any evidence that gang culture, social media, and or music impacts the young person's involvement in knife crime?
I think the reason I wanted you to ask it again is because I think it's a very, in a way, vague and vast question that you're asking. Social media, whether we want to lump it or loathe it, has changed the world in many respects, right? And the whole point of social media in many respects is to make the world smaller. There's evidence of how people have used social media for positive, but there is also evidence with regards to how people misuse it. So really the question is, who does the responsibility lie with? The social media company, the parents, or the young people, or the government?
Straight simple. You've answered it right there. The person that is responsible is the parents, because kids are in the home.
Yeah, no. So, but therefore, that's why I'm trying to just kind of navigate the answer to your question. So, with social media, one thing so before, in terms of growing up, for example, across the board, the majority of people might come home and watch EastEnders, right? Now, when young people or people in general come home, there's so many different mediums that they can access entertainment, news, and so on and so forth, right? So we're more likely to access the news via Twitter than we are from watching BBC, as it were. But what social media also allows you to do is to kind of set your own subcultural groups across, but you can set up your own subcultural groups without there being, by eliminating geographical boundaries, right? So maybe when I was growing up, I'll be aware of all the quote-unquote road youths or in my local area, Tottenham. Now, a young person growing up is aware of people in Lewisham, Manchester, Birmingham, and so on and so forth. Because, once again, social media eliminates geographical boundaries. If we're asking what responsibility can social media companies have in trying to reduce this, then I guess that's a different question. Do you see where I'm coming from? And that question gets a bit tricky. And let me just give you a quick example as to why. So, for example, YouTube, based on what happened in terms of knife crime, took aggressive measures with regards to what young people could put out there in terms of music.
I don't think YouTube took aggressive measures. I think I need to correct you on that. That's not true. YouTube were forced to take measures, and they weren't going to do it until when the Metropolitan Police said to them, if you don't do it, we're going to actually put out that you are supporting this violent lifestyle. So you need to be corrected, because you're making it sound like YouTube or social media. The points you're making are quite good, but you need to be careful, because you're trying to justify, right? The question is quite simple. There is an impact, but you can't justify.
Yes, but I think the point I was making is that there's clearly various impacts. So more what I'm trying to come in terms of a solution-based approach is trying to give examples of maybe what certain companies are, because I know we can't say names, so apologies for saying the name of the company, but what certain companies have tried to put in place before, and how easy it is for young people to circumvent those avenues. Because as I mentioned before, there are various different types of social media platforms. So for example, I might take something down from place A, but it lands on a more violent and aggressive place or more pornographic type location, as in location B. Do you understand? So all I'm trying to illustrate is the potential difficulties and challenges you have with regards to social media, and the fact that because it goes across so many different geographical landscapes, even if you took one measure in the UK, that same measure may not necessarily be applied in America, for example. So therefore, I might not be able to watch Mr. B in the UK, but I can still watch Mr. A, B, C, D in France, the US, and so on and so forth. That's doing all sorts of quote unquote crazy things, as it were. So, in a nutshell, if we are looking at how do we want to address social media, really you're then looking for some sort of governmental law that crosses all of the social media platforms and has a way of tracking each of these social media platforms to a particular person. So for example, you would need, each person to have a real digital fingerprint that attaches them to logging onto that platform in order to kind of hold them accountable. But as we don't seem to have that, or as that doesn't seem to be in play, if I set up my, let me make up another name, my Snaplack today, and my Snaplack account gets closed, I can set up my Snaplack account via various other means. Do you see the challenges that will need to be overcome if we're trying to hold social media accountable to some degree?
Thank you. Could I ask Carly to please put her input in?
Yeah. So I won't talk. I won't, because I know you guys, you want to move on to the next question as well, probably. The evidence. Thank you for your question as well, James. We are constantly looking for evidence because we need to get that evidence out there to make changes. So I do understand where you're coming from with your question. We know the evidence. We see it every day. We work with young people. I work with. At the moment, I'm working with 20 young men, and they know that they're getting drawn out on social media, like putting, besides the music videos that are drawing them out, this comment's made about this one, even with, what did you call it, Snapbook? So even with Snapbook, we know that our young men, they're going on, they're seeing something, they're being dissed, they're being cussed, they need to react. Their pride, they want to react. They don't want to react, but they have to react. Otherwise, they're seen to be, I don't want to use certain words in here, obviously, but they're seen to be a bit wet, they're not part of the circle, they're not part of the gang, they're not part of the peer group, because you're not dealing with what he said to you. He's cussed your mum, you don't want to deal with that. Well, he's cussed your mum and you're not dealing with it. That kind of thing. I'm working with young men who 5 months down the line have said, you know what, Carly, I don't want my Android phone. I don't want my iPhone. They've got small burner phones. Now, we recognise burner phones to be involved with county lines and drug running, but they have these burner phones, not because they're involved in that at this point, but because they don't want to be drawn out. Okay, for us back in the day, we had pagers, we had mobile phones, we had to go and top up. If someone made a threat, we got to go to the corner shop, get £5 credit and send a text. Why are you speaking to me like that? It's not like that now. You just need to go to McDonald's, you hit the Wi-Fi, boom. You can say whatever it is you want, you know, but it's the mindset behind our young people. That's why some of my young men, they're like, okay, I don't want to be drawn out. I don't want to be in that situation. I will replace my Android phone so I don't have to be involved in that. And it's about getting them to that place. We can take their phones away. We can shut down all these platforms, but they will find a way if they want to, and they don't have the belief that there is something else out there for them.
I think the answer is really going to come from your generation, right? Because I feel if any other generation was presented with these challenges, they'll probably fall perceptible to them as well. The reality of it is, these guys that we're talking about are all digital natives, right? I'm not a digital native, so I can detract myself away from social media platforms. Many of these people regard a social media platform as their right hand. Do you see where I'm coming from? As soon as they wake up, there's certain people that will show you what they have for breakfast, what they have for lunch, conversations with their mums, and so on and so forth. There's a certain normalization with young people and social media platforms. How we address that and how we maybe try to make a next generation aware of the separation is something that we need to do, is something that we need to address. But the current generation that's going through it, in terms of accountability and restriction of use on these social media platforms, I think that would be a better phrased question, or something that we should be maybe exploring on this panel.
Thanks. So as we spent quite a lot of time in the initial questions, could I please just ask the panel in their future responses to just try and keep it as brief as possible? And I'll now pass on to you and to ask the next question.
Are there specific factors that make young people more at risk of being victims or perpetrators of serious youth violence? And are there specific groups that these affect most?
Definitely. The attachment theory tells you that, and Maslow's hierarchy of need tells you that. If you don't know what that is, you need to look that up on the internet, because it will take long to explain, and I'll give it. We have to keep the answers brief. It's quite simple. All what we're discussing here comes down to parenting. I know people want to check their responsibility and try and look for different reasons, look for interventions. Interventions can't fix this. Each child we are talking about comes from a home. They don't come from the yacht, they don't come from probation, nor St. Giles or Gangs Line, or where crime is organized. They don't come from, they come from homes. And until we address this on a societal issue, you're talking about our children, simple. In 2015, the UN released a report on Britain, parenting. And it said that children are more likely to grow up in England in a household that lacks love. Children who lack love will go elsewhere looking for it. And in the case of young people today, and in my case, I'll go back to the 1970s. I went looking for it. I became a gang leader. Nothing has changed. Today, young people do the same. If you don't have love in a family home, if you don't have a father figure to raise you, to make you understand what it means to be a man, or to raise a girl, to make her choose the right partner, and not choose a partner that gets her pregnant and leaves her. If you don't have those, all what we're discussing is pointless. We can talk about music all day, but everything comes down to parenting. We have children between the ages of 8 and 12 who spend more time on social media than they do with their mums and dads. If you don't spend any time with your mum and dad, how's your mum going to know who you are? How are you going to know how you can interact? Because if you're looking at social media and all you're getting is that rubbish that comes up on there from the different young people that tells you to act in a certain way, tells 8-year-old girls to wear makeup, tell 8-year-old girls to wear miniskirt, tell guys out there just to go on road, and does different things. And I'm not suggesting that every part of social media does that, but I'm sorry, most of the things that young people watch on social media is negative. And the reason why is because mum or dad is not in control at home. If you're not in control at home, your child will do what they want. When I go into parents' home, the child is in the bedroom on their own, on social media. What intervention is going to fix that? That's the problem. We think intervention is going to fix things. Intervention cannot fix societal issues. Societal issues has to come from people in society recognising what do we want in society. Because at this moment in time, we've got children growing up in houses where there are no fathers, and we have accepted it. We've literally accepted that absent fathers should be absent. So to answer your question, children are more likely to be groomed, exploited, because they lack love at home.
Thank you. Nicole?
Hi, thanks. So I think even the word parents and trying to put the blame, it actually hurts my heart a little bit. I don't want to sound dramatic or emotional here, but the parents that I've worked with over the last 4 years, I've got my mum sat behind me as well today with us. My mum was there for me 24/7. She gave me everything I needed growing up. I was provided with a lot of love, a lot of care, a lot of material things. I had everything that I wanted. I didn't feel so great in here, but not because of what mum was doing, but because generally just how I felt in society. She tried to give me that confidence. She tried to build my esteem. She tried to do everything possible for me, but I took the choice. I made the choice to go down a route because I felt I almost didn't fit into certain parts of society. Now, the parents that I work with today, I need to strip it back a little bit as well, because the parents that I work with today, you know, Sheldon's right. They're not in the home. They're not in the family home. And I tell you why they're not in the family home, because they are out. My parents are out there. They are working minimum wage, 0-hour contracts, trying to provide for their young people, their children. They still can't give their children everything they want, because what our young people see on social media in these music videos, all the jewellery, the money, flashing the car, they're aspiring. They want that. All right, Mama can't provide that.
Carly, let me just say before.
But I don't think it's fair.
Let me just say.
So if
what
we could
Carly's
just let
saying
Carly
is
finish,
true. Yeah,
and
what
then
Carly's
afterwards
saying
we'll
is
come
true.
to you.
But the stats
Sheldon?
I'm talking about are parents who are unemployed. I am not talking about the stats that Carly is mentioned. So I'm sorry to interject.
No, that's fine. So we're talking about two lots of parents. We're talking about parents across the board, okay? And there are, I can't disagree with Sheldon. We've all got our own experiences, our own lived experience and experience of working with families, communities and young people, okay? But I'm talking about my parents that I work with, my parent that sat behind me, okay? They are out there. They are grafting day after day, minute after minute, okay? They leave the house at 6 in the morning. They finish their first job at 8. They go on to their next job. They finish that one at 10. They go on to the next one. Okay, now what we need to be looking at is the bigger picture. We need to be looking at how we make sure that that doesn't happen. How our young people, they've got long-term prospects. They're not on 0-hour contracts. Okay, they're out there. They're doing a job that they enjoy. This is what we need to be looking at. Intervention is important. Prevention is just as important. And we need to give these young people hope. We need to let them know that, you know what, you are able to do whatever it is you want to do at whatever stage. If you want it, people like us, people like you that are fighting for young people your age, people older than you, we will back you, we will support you. Okay, but at the same time, we need the support from the government as well. Now, I haven't come here today, and I'm feeling a little bit angry now, I haven't come here today to say that the government aren't doing enough, but the government do have a responsibility. Okay, and we need to be working on this together. It's all very well blaming drill music. It's all very well blaming the parents and this one, that one. All right, but let's look at the people at the top. All right, let's look at them and see what they're doing, because I know that I'm not here with stats and figures today, guys. I'm here with feeling and emotions, all right, because I'm sick of every day looking into a parent's eyes, them saying, Carly, I don't know if my son is going to come home tonight. I don't know if I'm going to get the knock at the door from the police to tell me that they have killed someone. I received a phone call last week to say that somebody had passed. My colleague received a phone call the week before to say one of his clients had passed. Like, guys, this has got to stop. And I know I'm venting now, but it's because it's something that I feel so strongly about. And we are losing people left, right and centre. And we cannot continue like this. We are looking at a load of young people that not only right now are they losing their lives to knife crime, okay, they are witnessing losing people to knife crime. Post-traumatic stress disorder is going through the roof, all right, for our young people. In 5 years, we're looking at mental health already. In 5 years, we're going to have a group of young men and women that are walking around absolutely out of their minds because they can't cope with what they have seen and heard 5 years before.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Sorry.
So,
I'm going to try and keep
yeah.
it as brief as
Thank
possible. In short, I feel that it's due to various socio-economic factors. But I guess as everyone's touched on parenting, I'll touch on parenting from two perspectives. I feel that it is, from an economic standpoint, it's extremely difficult now to be a parent. Our aim should be to support various different type of parental structures by first acknowledging them, right? I've come across young people, some have two mums, some have live with their grandparents, some are from single parent households and so on and so forth. Due to the socio-economic pressures of parenting, maybe there is an increase in latchkey children, but unfortunately this generation of latchkey children will differ from the last, because opposed to just being raised by their local area, they're now probably raised by social media as well. So to keep the answer short and sweet, I feel it is down to socio-economic issues, which does impact on parents' ability to actually be parents.
I'm going to answer on the socio-economic, because they're both, Carly's made some good points, and so has Kwame. The fact is, there's lots of poor people in this country who've never committed a crime. And this idea that when you're poor, you're going to commit a crime is nonsense. The whole thing about economic factors is true from the point that Carly's talking about. When we look at from a governmental structure, the apprenticeship scheme is an example of what we're going to talk about. They offer a 17-year-old £3 something an hour with no guarantee of a job. That is ludicrous. Because when a gang member in East London goes up to that 17-year-old and says, I'll give you 100...
But that's socio-economic then.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to mention it now. And offers him £150, £175 a day. That will then make an impact on whether he's going to do that apprenticeship course at £3.79 or £4 an hour. And the point that Carly made does have to be looked at. The problem is that we have a government, successive governments, by the way, because I'm not just going to sit here and cuss off the Conservative. The Labour Party didn't do anything. I'm talking about looking at vision for young people, which is a hope, which is what Carly's talking about. There is no vision for young people. So with no vision, you can't have an economic, social things taken into consideration because there's no vision. So until England has a government that has vision for children, in other words, those kids who don't want to go to uni, who just want to leave school and get a job, should be entitled to a decent wage. But unfortunately, the wage structure doesn't allow for kids to start off on the right footing. In other words, the child who wants to work straight from school would have to pay to go to work because the pay is so bad. So the point that Carly's made is quite valid, and the point that we're making about parenting is valid, but the point what I'm trying to get across, no matter how we look at it, whether it be on the economic or social factors, or whether we want to look at the government, which is what Carly was alluding to about not just sitting there blaming the government, every single thing still comes down to expectation levels from parenting. If you choose the wrong partner, and that person leaves you with a child, and then you choose another partner who does the similar, you've got two children for two different men who are not going to take responsibility for those children. That has an impact on a woman to try to do her best in a difficult situation. And I believe that unless we get societal issues right, which is fundamentally about social factors, economic factors, which is the government's vision for children, we need to have parents' vision for their own children. In other words, we've got to make right decisions with the partners we choose. Because if we keep choosing the wrong partners, the cycle that we're in will never get broken. So it's not a dig at parenting, single mothers, it's a dig at that we as a society have to look at these issues more than just keep saying when you're poor you're going to commit a crime, because that's not true.
Thanks. So if we move on to the next question, which Jack will ask.
So, as a committee, we received lots of evidence which mentioned the importance of role models for young people and kind of moving away from maybe the family and more people with lived experiences and role models. How effective do you think that positive role models are in deterring young people from gang and criminal activity?
I think, number one, I think it's unfair to associate violence with young people. I don't know about this year's stats, but I remember reading last year's stats saying that there was more people that died from domestic violence than there were young people that died from knife crime, as it were. The generation committing domestic violence is clearly above the generation that we're talking about now in terms of knife crime. So
Thank you.
Yeah, for me, I think, just on the back of what has been said, society has a role to play in this. Not everybody aspires to be a rapper, a drill artist, a producer. I work with young men that want to be architects, which I'm always like, oh, wow, okay. Or they want to be mechanics, or they want to get into plumbing or something like that. But we need the community, society to be giving that back as well. People that maybe have come from the bottom and they're working their way up, we need them to come and share their story, their lived experience. Doesn't mean they have to be ex-offenders. Doesn't mean they need to be, oh, do you know what, bruv, I was on road and now I'm an architect and this and that and the other. But we do need to know how these guys, they got there, how their journey went, and give that back, and provide that hope and those dreams. And our mentors, they need to be credible, like our role models, who are our young people's role models right now? Because I know that 20 years, footballers and rappers, but 20 years ago, there was a lot more male role models out there, but there were also a lot more fathers that were in the family home 20 years ago.
Not more.
Okay.
Yeah, but that ceiling of poverty of ambition, to give you a prime example, doesn't come from our communities. It comes, for example, I don't believe that we can't say names, so let's just say Boris Johnstone is more intelligent than Sheldon, for example. But we all know that the probability of someone like Sheldon reaching a position of Boris Johnson is extremely small, illustrating that we just don't live in an meritocratic society.
If we could just move on to the next question, which Theo will ask.
Well, it's going on to that point exactly, because last week we heard from ministers that they want to basically use rappers and athletes as a way of engaging young people involved in crime.
That's an insult.
As we got
Straight away. I'm going to tell you that now.
Before you go
finish.
into it, please.
That's an insult.
Before you go into it, all your contributions are valuable, okay? And we really appreciate it, but we haven't got time. And to give the best evidence possible, we're covering a range of issues today. So please give your answers briefly. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts, I just told you, it's an insult, and that's the problem. Carly's just mentioned that again, and so is Kwame, talking about the whole thing starts from school. If we go to school, and at the moment we go into a lot of schools, and a majority of schools we've been into, the percentage of black students have been 70 to 75%, but the percentage of white teachers have been 90% in those schools. We're talking about sportsmen, but those very sportsmen that the people who want to be mentors drink alcohol, crash their cars, buy lots of cars. So it's the wrong image, and it goes back to what Kwame and Carly are saying. What we need, and this is why MPs should never talk. MPs should keep their mouth quiet because they don't know what they're talking about and they insult the intelligence of our community. What we need in our community are normal people who have broken the glass ceiling, like ourselves, who have broken the glass ceiling to get to a certain position. I run a consultancy firm, unheard of in the black community, but I run one. And what I'm trying to show people is if we're going to forever keep using sports people who are not ideal sports role models, and I'm not saying all sports people are bad, I'm saying that MPs who doesn't know anything about this lifestyle, who've never come from these family homes, shouldn't speak about things they don't know nothing about. They should go to people like Carly and she will set them straight, or Kwame, anyone. But what I'm saying is this: if you want role models, then it has to start in school. That means we need to employ more black teachers in schools where the percentage of black students is very high. We're in 2019. We came to this country in 48, and by the 1960s, we was in schools where quite a lot of young black kids were, and we had all white teachers, and we still got that today. That means nothing has changed since the 1960s. Now, I know none of you guys can talk about the 60s, but I can. And if we've got schools in the 60s that was predominantly black, but all the teachers were white, and in 2019 we've got schools that are predominantly black and the teachers are still white, it tells you that what Carly and us is talking about here can only materialise when that changes.
Okay,
thank you, Sheldon. So, thank you, but we're going to have to move on to the other panellists. So, if Quabs, would you like to input?
So basically, from the question you asked, you're saying that the government's trying to find more relatable characters for young people to connect with, but as Sheldon has illustrated, that's not going to solve the problem, because you're still the main issue beyond music and anything else is that in these environments there's a poverty of ambition, right? And you're then saying to eradicate the poverty of ambition, aspire to make it in the things that we've already proven we can be successful in, and that's not the right direction. In order to eradicate the poverty of ambition, we need to provide. We need to try and connect these young people with more people that have gone against the so-called stereotypical norm of what success looks like in our media when connected with people from certain environments. And this isn't just black, this is also in terms of white people as well. And I feel that even when we look at conversations such as Brexit and so on and so forth, and the amount of time we spent on having these conversations, but yet we still can see the fundamental connection between that and what many of our young people are going through, kind of shows the level of disconnect, as it were. So we do need to just basically, as opposed to empowering sports stars and rappers, maybe empower more local individuals and connect them more with our social leaders. And just one final point. Let's move on.
Yes, thank you.
Just to come on what the back of the guys have said as well, we need to be in schools. We need to be, at St Giles, across our organisation, we have lived experience, okay? Well, I don't want to presume again, like you did at the beginning, but I work with a number of young men and women, my colleagues, who have that lived experience, that credible experience, that can sit down and identify with that young person across the board. Not with every situation, but they can identify in some way. Now, it doesn't mean that the only people that can help our young people are people with criminal records and lived experience at all, but we need those people, but we need people that recognise difference, okay? And everybody's hopes are different, everybody's dreams can be different, and we need to treat people as individuals, which I don't think we do enough of in this country. We don't see them as individuals. Okay, that's the black community, that's the white community, that's the blah blah community. No, actually, each young person is their own person. I want to be treated as my own person. We're not the same, us three. We might share the same ideas and concepts. We might disagree, as you've heard as well today. We disagree with each other's opinions, but we are individuals, and that's what we don't see as our young people as individuals.
Thank you. So, just to finish the session, I'd like to thank all of you for coming here and providing evidence and sharing your views upon this topic. We're very eager to use all your contributions, and that will help us with the report that we're making for the government. So this session has now come to a close. Thank you. Order.
Sorry, can I just say one thing, guys? Because I know we've overstepped on some of the questions, and I know you had a lot more questions that you wanted to ask as well. So we are all available by email as well. So anything that you didn't quite get, anything that didn't quite make sense, you can make contact with any of us, our organisations, and we will be willing to talk, to share whatever it is that you like.
And just in point as well, there was just one key important point that I did omit, is that most young people involved in gang violence, their parents, there's only like 3 degrees of separation, so we do need to find a way to create time for parents to connect with each other. But yeah, thank you all again for your patience.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding is current.
Order. Order. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to our witnesses for coming here today. So firstly, I'd just like to introduce the Youth Select Committee. My name is Rachel Lojo, and I am the chair of the Youth Select Committee for 2019.
My name's Susanna Single, and I am the vice chair of the Youth Select Committee.
Hi, I'm Jack.
Hi, I'm James.
I'm you.
Hi, I'm Charlie.
Hi, I'm Billy.
Hi, I'm Chris.
Hi, I'm Julie. Hi, I'm Husna.
And hi, I'm Theo.
Thank you. So I would just like to ask the panel to introduce themselves and the work that they've been doing. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm Jeremy Crook, the Chief Executive of the Black Training Enterprise Group, VTEG. I'm not speaking on behalf of the AHM Prison and Probation Service today. We're a charity that's been around for 28 years, essentially trying to ensure that black, Asian and minority ethnic young people do well in education and employment. And we also do specific work around the criminal justice system, trying to improve outcomes for BAME young people and the Muslim groups. And our particular interest is obviously to tackle disproportionality in the justice system and the labour market.
Hi everybody, my name is Iman Haji and I'm the Research and Programme Coordinator at a charity called Kalisa. If you're wondering about the name, we are originally from South Africa, and Kalisa is a Zulu word which means to nurture. So that aspect of really putting well-being at the centre of everything we do is really important to us. So we work directly with young people in schools, prisons and in the community. And we also train the professionals who work with them in our trauma-informed methodology and then conduct research on improving outcomes for young people in the education and criminal justice systems.
Hi, I'm Matthew Scott. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Kent, but I also lead for Police and Crime Commissioners nationally on mental health, police performance, and also leaving the European Union. I am elected on behalf of the people of Kent. We have Police and Crime Commissioners, as you may know, everywhere outside of London and Manchester to set the police priorities, to make our community safer, to hold the force to account for their performance and delivery. We're responsible for finances and commissioning services for victims of crime. And I've been working very closely with a number of different organisations, charities and the police to make sure that we're keeping young people safe, that we are giving people an exit from potentially risky situations, but also making sure that the police have got the resources they need to do enforcement work as well.
Hi everyone, my name's Daniel Willis. I'm the Policy and Research Manager at Community Links. Community Links is a social action charity based in Newham in East London. We've been there for about 40 years and we deliver a wide range of employability services, youth and advice services and projects to help the local community and meet a series of kind of prevailing needs. The sort of evidence I'll be speaking from today is based on a research project that we conducted last year. Sort of early last year, there were two quite serious incidents of youth violence that affected us closely at Community Links. So we embarked on a research project to listen to local residents' opinions on what they thought the root causes and solutions to youth violence were. We listened to over 200 Newham residents, and over a third of those were people aged 25 and under. So I'll be drawing on a lot of what they told us in that project. We also been involved in the Home Office's delivery of the Knife-Free project earlier this year. And Community Links is part of the wider Catch-22 group, which is a national organisation which runs a series of services in prisons with offenders, youth services and other areas. So I'll also be drawing on some of the evidence from that service delivery as well.
Thank you. So before we start, we do have quite a lot of questions to get through. So if I could just remind the whole panel to keep their answers brief in the questions. So the first question, which I'd like to propose to Daniel Willis, is that in one of the papers produced by Community Links, looking at tackling youth violence, you talk about the sense of belonging and safety which gangs provide for young people. What support would you like to see provided to deter young people from gangs and make them feel safer and more engaged in their own communities? And who should be responsible for this?
So thanks, Rachel, for the question. On that point, I think one of the key things we'd say is the importance of building emotional resilience early with young people, and also of establishing role models and key relationships in young people's lives so that they always have someone to turn to in a moment when they need advice, but also that they're kind of building capacity within themselves to react well to difficult situations.
We have experience building this kind of resilience through a peer mentoring program we have called More Than Mentors. So this program has been evaluated and has been shown to have statistically significant results in improving the relationships that young people have with each other, but also with role models and older people as well. So we think that these kind of services, and as well the work we did on the Knife Free project, are really crucial for helping young people build positive and trusting relationships. A lot of the people we spoke to in the paper that you mentioned, Rachel, also raised the issue of their communities being fastly changing environments, and also issues of kind of inequality and regeneration. So I think it's important for us to always reflect back on the issues of why do young people not feel like they belong in their communities, and think about some of the kind of public spaces, youth clubs, community sector services that have been lost in recent years, and where people would have previously gone to just to hang out with their friends or access other services. So I think for us there's a balance to be struck between investing in some of that kind of social infrastructure, which spaces which kind of make the community strong, where people can come together and work together and sort of make friends, but also for both statutory and third sector services to be focusing on the importance of relationships and positive role models for young people.
Thank you. So if we move on to the next question, which Chris will ask.
So my question is to the whole panel. Does the government's anti-knife crime strategy provide for effective intervention for someone who has been cautioned for a knife-related offence?
Should I start that one?
It's up to you.
Yeah, okay, I'll go first. I think that the government's anti-knife strategy and also the serious violence strategy is a step in the right direction. I think they are both positive things to have. My main concern about those programmes is how money is being spent locally. And I believe that we need to see greater investment in some of those programmes at a local level, perhaps through police and crime commissioners who can work with those charities on the ground in order to engage with those young people who are at risk. We have a number of programmes locally which do that. We have talks in local schools, we have youth engagement officers who work with schools and youth clubs. But some of the more difficult work, which is around identifying those young people and engaging with them and giving them someone to work with to extract them from a risk of knife crime, is expensive and requires further investment. So we've got a number of those programmes running, but I think my main call to the government would be to increase that investment, create a prevention fund which police and crime commissioners could use in order to engage more of those interventions.
I think I'd agree with that. The resources are very important, and the government is increasingly allocating resources to serious youth violence and knife crime. I suppose from my point of view, running a kind of BME-led organisation, charity, is the extent to which resources actually reach BME organisations that work with young people in communities, and they can access resources to do an adequate and effective job. So we've seen over the last 30 years lots of public money going into urban areas, deprived areas, but the impact you could look at now has been minimal. And I would argue from my perspective as a charity trying to support charities locally, especially BME ones, that they're still not accessing resources from mainstream funds, from charitable trusts, from government. So unless we really do track and monitor who is getting the money, are they really connected to the young people that need the help and support, I would question whether we're going to see kind of real change because of that deficit of proper resource reaching the right organisations at the right time. There are some very good organisations, but they are very small, under-resourced, and they need scale and capacity to be able to engage with police better, with schools, with youth organisations. We know obviously youth services have been starved of funding for quite a long time, and there's a real gap there. But I would encourage the panel to really think about who are the real stakeholders, who can really make a difference in communities with young people. And I think a big part of the solution is BME organisations that have got BME people with lived experience who can connect with those young people, interface with public authorities and employers who are a key stakeholder but often overlooked, because there's a big opportunity deficit that we need to close to make sure young people believe they can get on if they do well in education once they've achieved success in that respect.
Cool, I'll go. I think there's an overwhelming focus on what happened to young people once they're caught with a knife. I don't think there's enough attention being paid to adopting a holistic approach. What can we do to support young people before they get to that stage? And we're seeing increasing recognition, whether it's in the Mayor's knife crime strategy or in the government's serious violence strategy, about the importance of prevention and building young people's resilience. What we're not seeing is kind of a cogent outcomes framework of how we will achieve that. We know that building young people's resilience, building their social and emotional well-being is not only a protective factor from being involved in crime, it's also strengthens life outcomes, whether it's getting a good job, education, even their health outcomes, and not enough attention is being paid to that at the moment, is what we would argue.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that from what Imam and Jeremy have said. Particularly, I think the emphasis on early intervention and prevention in both the serious violence strategy and the Mayor of London's work has been really welcome. Just on the point of kind of cautions and policing, I think one thing we heard quite clearly was that there was a lack of trust among young people of the police. And trying to sort of rectify that in a very tense and difficult situation is something that needs some thought. I think personally we'd like to see sort of more of a trauma-informed approach. So rather than thinking just necessarily, like Imam said, about the kind of point at which a young person's caught with a knife, think about the path which has got them to that situation. Think about what kind of trauma and suffering has put them in that position to make them want to carry a knife. And we've heard numerous times from people across our services, a young person won't carry a knife unless they're scared for their life. So I think trying to understand that issue a bit more and build that kind of trauma-informed work into policing, which I know there's certainly a lot of efforts to do, would be really welcome from our point of view. But just on cautioning specifically, I mean, anything that takes that on board and maybe avoids a young person getting a criminal record and can help them later in life is potentially a positive step, I think, from our point of view.
Thank you. What more should the government do to make it work even better or more consistently?
I think we can't get away from the fundamental point that we've got a lot less police in our communities. It seems to me when bereaved parents say they want more to be done, they want more visible policing. So whatever strategies are in place, I think government's very good at writing strategies and then doing analysis, and you read all those documents and they all make sense and they're all very rational. But it's the implementation, isn't it, and the delivery on the ground and how we connect things up, which is really important, and having the right people working together. And I think we're not doing enough to get engagement of the right people to make sure we can follow through, we can track how young people are being supported, we can view them in the right way, not negatively as we often do in society, and make them feel a sense of belonging not just to their communities but to society. So I think we still view too many of our black and Asian young people through a very negative lens, and I think that does impact on how services are delivered because they're not informed, and the premise from which we start is often a very narrow, limited, negative one, rather than seeing those young people that are vulnerable, need help, need support. The trauma-based approach is obviously very important, as has been said by previous speakers and the panel. But you've got to get the right people in the room, in delivery. And I think it is undermined, from my view, by stop and search. And now that's implemented. That doesn't breed trust and confidence amongst young people. So the system, whilst it's trying to do good things on the one hand, is undermining its activities on the other by poor police practice. Things like the gangs matrix are not helpful in the way they're implemented and perceived by communities. So I think we've got to have a view of realism about young people's experience, and parents and communities, what they see every day in the community, does kind of make us feel like the engagement is not worthwhile because we can't see the actual institutional change in these organisations in the way they deliver services or think about service delivery. And as I think Sheldon said earlier, we do need to see BAME people in all of these organisations at all levels, which we don't at the moment. So there's still a disparity there in the workforce of all these partners that need to work together, as well as the lack of resource and lack of engagement with the right organisations in communities.
I would like to pick up on one point that Jeremy made there, and I think it's around the engagement of policing with young people and the public at large. Policing is now inspected on those things. We have an inspection regime which is called legitimacy, which is how policing works with the community, how it protects and serves with the community to keep them safe. In Kent, we're lucky. We have a police force which has been deemed outstanding 4 years in a row for that, which is an outstanding achievement in of itself. But we've actually got independent reviews going on of how the police engages with its public. So there are things that policing can be doing that they are assessed on in order to improve that, particularly when it comes to tactics such as stop and search and the other use of force, and maybe some of the other things like body-worn video as well. But to go back to your question in terms of what we need, yeah, we do need more police officers in a number of police force areas. In Kent, there'll be 450 more police officers by the end of this year than when I was elected 3 years ago. But that's a picture which is being replicated in some other forces. Katie Bourne in Sussex, Roger Hurst in Essex, John Campion in West Mercia. There are a lot of police recruitment going on at the moment to try and turn the tide back the other way in terms of the number of officers that we have lost. But they obviously need to make sure that they are engaging in the right way and that their legitimacy is good. We do need further investment in prevention, as I mentioned, and I think police and crime commissioners are the perfect vehicle to do that. And again, to pick up on the point that Iman made about outcomes, police and crime commissioners are scrutinised and we are accountable. So through our local dissemination of funding, we can be held to account for how that reaches the grassroots and different organisations. And again, as Jeremy said, making sure that that is getting to the organisations who need it and can do the work. And then finally, it's about having an effective criminal justice system, because it's not just about policing and police numbers which have reduced in recent years. It's actually about a criminal justice system that works for everybody, that we are not unnecessarily criminalising young people. I believe it takes quite a lot actually for a young person to get a criminal record these days, because there are so many community resolutions out there and different mechanisms to prevent young people from entering the criminal justice system. But we need a justice system that works for victims, for witnesses, but also that rehabilitates and addresses some of those underlying issues. So those, I would say, are the three things that we need to improve.
Thank you. So if we could just move to the next question, which will be asked by James. Yeah.
My question is to the whole panel, and is: do you think the government's serious violence strategy strikes the right balance between preventative, punitive and rehabilitative action?
I think, as I said, you can read those strategies from government and they do look balanced and they do seem like they've got the right, between prevention and law enforcement, and you wouldn't disagree with it. It's the reality of how those policies impact. For example, in the youth custody system, youth justice, we've got, I think, 51% of the people in youth offending institutions are BAME, and large proportion of that is young black children and young men. Their reoffending rates are much higher when they come out. And it does beg the question, what is being done when they're in custody to help them to be successful when they come out in terms of learning, education, inspiration? And when they come out, why are they reoffending at much higher rates than anyone else in terms of young people? Is that because of lack of jobs? Is it negative stereotyping? Is it racism? Are we doing enough to make sure they can actually resettle and reintegrate as young people? Or are we not doing enough so they fall back into whatever they were doing before and end up back in the justice system? So I think the whole follow-through needs to be really robust, and we cannot ignore the whole opportunity aspect, which is getting a good job, including a good apprenticeship. And we know nationally we do not have a fair outcome for BAME young people in apprenticeships. Only 11% of apprenticeship starts off from BAME backgrounds. We represent 14% of the population. And we are also in sectors, in terms of apprenticeships, that are low-paid sectors, as Sheldon said earlier. So we do have to tackle the economic side of this equation, else we're never going to, I think, break the cycle of the young black and Asian people being overrepresented in the justice system and not having enough opportunity locally and support. But we do, as I keep saying, need to bring employers into this, because prevention is about opportunity, recognising young people have got talent. All young people can offer something, clearly. But we've got to be able to draw that talent out, support it and encourage it. And if schools aren't doing that enough for all of our young people, there's a problem there, isn't there? If the police aren't adequately engaged in communicating with young people, there's going to be a communication gap there, which there often is. Despite some police forces doing better than they were 5 or 10 years ago, there are still real issues about engagement, communication and trust. And we won't, I think, see a lot more steps in the right direction unless we really do come to a position on things like stop and search to make sure it is free of bias, is fair. I saw a group of two young people being stopped and searched recently. You can see the embarrassment, the frustration, the way that's done in a high street with a group of police officers around two young people. Nothing was found, and yet for 10, 15 minutes they were stood up, searched, and then let go. But you could see the anxiety amongst those young people. I listened to, I think, a couple of hundred young people in Newham last year in a local consultation with the Mayor of Newham, and they talked about their fear about going around their daily lives in their communities, going to school, standing at the bus stop. They didn't feel safe. These were all young people from all backgrounds. And so I do think, clearly, you've got to kind of make sure young people feel safe in their communities. Part of that is more community police officers, more police officers, but people who understand their communities, not shipped in from outside of London, who don't really get the communities, don't know the young people, don't talk to them, can't talk to them because they don't know how to relate to them. So all these things make a difference, and we're never going to reflect, I don't think, in every London borough, for example, the local population. But we've got to get better than where we are at the moment and make sure the training is really inclusive, robust and challenging. So police officers and everyone else involved with young people can talk about issues that to do with colour, race, faith, in a confident manner that can move things forward rather than just ignoring these things, and we keep coming up against the same problems year in, year out. Clearly we've got to get knives off the streets, out of communities, but we obviously, the mindset of young people, it's all been well researched why young people tend to carry a knife and use them, and that you can understand the rationale there. We've got to obviously break that rationale and make people feel safe, leading their lives in their communities, in schools, in youth centres, on the streets. And we're all pained by what's happening in our streets at the moment, especially in London. The last few days there's been obviously a number of murders, and that is shocking. But it's not shocking us enough, is it? It seems to me, to really turn the tide on this and get the resource we need to really kind of turn this around and get everyone engaged. Some parents, some guardians, some children in care are not getting enough support. They need support, they need encouragement. I think schools, whilst we work with a lot of schools and provide role model programs, many schools don't even respond to a communication to say, we would like to work with you, we've got a free service. Maybe it's capacity, I don't know, but they just do not respond and say we would welcome your support, your engagement. I hope they engage with other charities, but my experience is not enough schools who need help actually draw down the help when it's being offered as well, and that needs to change.
We talked a bit in our written evidence about how there are a number of things that would suggest this balance is being paid attention to. So, for example, the serious violence strategy talks about the importance of a multi-agency approach, because no one organisation can solve everything to do with serious violence. It also talks about the social and financial impacts of adverse childhood experiences and the importance of early intervention in challenging this. And the serious violence strategy also talks about the need to adopt diversion where possible in order to get young people away from the criminogenic pool of prison. But when you dig a little deeper from the text and you look actually at the commitments being made, there's arguments to suggest that that balance isn't being correctly striked. So, for example, we talk about in the serious violence strategy how there's a trauma-informed model to be introduced for youth offending teams and the police. But if we're going to get that balance of punitive versus preventative right, where is that same support for teachers and other arenas where preventative action can take place? We also see the focus is on older children, where behaviour is more likely to be entrenched than on younger children, where we can do preventative work. The focus again is on teachable moments, but that's a moment of crisis when the young person has already been a victim or a perpetrator of crime. Where's that same level of support for young people before they get there? And when you look at the amount of thought that's been given to these enforcement-based initiatives and compare it to where the preventative thought is, I mentioned earlier there's a recognition of the importance of building young people's resilience, but the same amount of funding isn't being given to that, and that being done in schools, and what work will be done cross-departmentally to ensure that's being done across schools, prisons and the community. So on balance, I would say the balance has not been struck.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. I mean, Community Links coordinates a body called the Early Action Task Force, which talks and sort of lobbies a lot on the importance of prevention and early intervention. So we'd always argue that there's more preventative work to be done. But I think in this case, there's a strong case to be made that the more that government can invest in preventative and early interventions at the minute, the longer term benefits will be far greater, and there'll be sort of plenty of savings to be made. But I particularly think the point around having a holistic approach is absolutely crucial. You know, having early interventions which are just specifically designed to tackle youth violence in some areas, sort of isolated, won't work if there's not also consideration of the kind of health, education or housing issues that a lot of young people will be facing with their families. And if the kind of networks of support aren't provided in those areas, then young people's lives will be just as disrupted. And you know, a few hours at the youth club every week won't solve some of those more structural issues. So I think there's a lot of positive stuff in the strategy, and you know, there's more evidence to be built through the Youth Endowment Fund. So these are definitely positive steps. But you know, always I think more prevention is crucial, and you know, prevention is better than the cure. So the more that we can do now, the less that we'll have to do later.
I actually think the serious violence strategy in itself, when you look at it in the whole, with everything else which has been going on and the strategies which are coming out of the Home Office and other government departments, actually address some of the issues that the panel have been raising. The government is investing in mental health and resilience in schools now properly for the first time. We are seeing greater investment in prevention. I've obviously mentioned that I don't feel that it's enough, and we need to make sure that the comprehensive spending review identifies prevention as a key funding outcome for police and crime commissioners and police forces in the future, as well as some of the other organisations too. But a couple of the key points from the serious violence strategy which are really important and has been touched on is partnership. Policing cannot solve this problem on its own, nor is it their responsibility to do so. It does require a joined-up multi-agency approach. It needs the Department of Work and Pensions to be looking at issues such as welfare. It needs the local council to be looking at issues such as housing. We need public health departments looking at health inequalities, as well as police and crime commissioners looking at prevention and police forces looking at enforcement. A lot gets mentioned about the Glasgow Violence Reduction Unit, which has been running since 2008. We've had a similar model working in Margate, one of our most deprived areas in Kent, and an area where crime is higher than others. They've won awards for their multi-agency approach, and it's a model which I'm proud to support. So effective it has been that we're introducing another task force into Medway with support of extra resources from my office, as well as some wraparound care which we will be securing from sources such as the Early Intervention Youth Fund and my own Violence Reduction Fund from my office. I think we need to make sure that all of those agencies are stepping up to the plate, that they are all doing their bit, and that there is effective governance in place, that they are held to account by their actions. I do that through my Office of All Agencies in a number of different ways, whether it's through mental health or the local criminal justice board, or holding the Chief Constable to account on behalf of residents. So I think the serious violence strategy is good, but I hope that as we go on, because it's now nearly 18 months since the strategy itself was published, that it grows, it develops, it is I hate the phrase, living document, but it's not something that just gathers dust, and it continues to evolve over the next few years through the comprehensive spending review, so that the efforts of ministers and the Home Secretary and the Policing Minister are recognised in that funding settlement.
Thank you. So before we go on to the next question, I'd just like to remind the panellists to keep their answers brief. So I'll now invite Jack to ask the next question.
Do you believe that judicial sentencing is effective in serving as a deterrent, preventing reoffending and helping rehabilitation?
No, it's not. I don't think it's nearly effective as it should be. I think that you do need to have a joined-up approach which prevents criminalisation to begin with, but also when something serious has happened, that there is effective punishment as well as rehabilitation within prison. And we look at lots of different cases. Take assaults on police officers, for example. The government had to change the law in order to have more people sent to prison for assaulting emergency workers, because the sentences being given out were not fair, nor were they proportionate. We do need to make sure that we consider other options, maybe such as mandatory minimums, where people will go to prison for a specified amount of time, but only in so much as that we've got the rehabilitation to reduce reoffending going alongside it, because there's no point locking someone up in a cell for 23 hours a day and leaving them for 4 years. That's not going to solve anything. It needs to go hand in hand with the rehabilitation and reoffending. I've been looking at this through my local criminal justice board, which I chair, in conjunction with the Crown Prosecution Service, with victim support and also with the court service, to make sure that the justice system, yes, it makes sure the right people are going to prison, but at the same time victims and witnesses can have faith in the criminal justice system as well.
I'd agree with much of that. I think we all want to see young people kept out of custody as far as possible. Where they do need to go to custody, that we make sure that they get the proper support and rehabilitation. Clearly, the evidence suggests they're not getting the best effective support and learning and opportunities when they're in custody. But we need to make sure that we can give the judiciary good options in the community to divert them away from the justice system where that's appropriate, and maybe we need to use more of that. I think the David Lamb review showed that you're more likely to be given a custodial sentence if you are from a black and BAME background, disproportionately for the same offence. So we need to make sure and keep working with the judiciary to make sure that their sentencing is fair and not disproportionate. But my big concern is when they are in the custody system, they are given the right help. And the evidence seems to me at the moment that many are not. I think just over half feel that they are given help in custody to kind of come out and resettle. And that's young people with their whole lives ahead of them. So, they've got to be given better. I know the government's introducing secure schools as a new important measure to focus on education. But we've got, hundreds of young people in custody at the moment that need, obviously, a better offer and better support. And that is, how they connect with the community, families, institutions, jobs. And I think that needs to be really made bolder in terms of their connection to the labour market and opportunities.
This is a massive question. But I think I agree with what everybody said. But in terms of judicial sentencing, I would refer the committee to read a report by John Samuels and Jonathan Aitkins that looks or proposes a problem-solving courts model to be adopted here. And they essentially argue that judges can give sentences, but they don't then review or see what outcomes happen for that young person. And they essentially call for judges to be able to have oversight of what's being done to support young people that they've given these sentences to, because at the moment we know that things aren't working. Our reoffending rate is so high. So what can we do to ensure that, okay, fine, we've sentenced young people, but what support are they getting? And allowing judges to have that oversight hopefully creates accountability and ensures that young people are receiving that support.
Yeah, I would just echo what's been said already. For us, the key is to think about the forms of support that are provided during that sentence and the rehabilitation work that can take place. But equally, those kinds of questions, I think, need to be provided earlier as well. It's not just think about custodial sentences, but the way in which exclusions are potentially applied and what kind of support can be provided to young people at an earlier stage to sort of reframe the question to earlier action.
Thank you. So now we're going to move on to the next question, which will be asked by Husna.
In evidence to the committee, we've heard that young people would rather risk being caught with a knife and face consequences, so custodial sentences, than risk being without the knife if they meet someone that wants to hurt them. Do you think that the government has recognised this dilemma in drawing up its response to knife crime? If not, how should it be changed?
I'll go. I think this is something we actually mentioned in our written evidence, that we have young people on our programme saying, I would rather carry a knife and risk going to prison than lose my life. And I think we have to ask ourselves, why do young people feel so terrified that it's normal for them to carry a knife or a weapon as it is for them to carry a mobile phone? And fear is a massive factor that plays into that. And as I was saying earlier, the same way that crime doesn't have one single factor that causes it, there is no one response to it. And we need to have a multi-agency approach, but we need to also take into consideration contextual safeguarding. What can we do in our community? The resources are there, so how can we work better together? And in terms of whether the government has recognised that, there are pockets of good practice. So, for example, through the Home Office's Early Youth Intervention Fund, in Harrow there is a community project that's bringing together the council, police, statutory agencies and the voluntary sector to be able to provide direct support to young people in 20 youth centres, schools and community centres in hotspots of violence, to make sure that the young people are getting support, they're able to have somewhere that they can go and feel safe. But then information is being shared between the different agencies so that we can create a plan to better support young people. And because it's being developed by the community, for the community, it has some sort of credibility that an agency coming from outside might not have had. So yeah, there's pockets of good practice, but more can be done.
Yeah, like I've said previously, I mean, this is something we heard in our research in Newham as well, and something that a lot of young people would recognise as being a sort of reality. You know, we would definitely back a sort of a change of approach to be more trauma informed and to be considering, you know, why is that young person, what's the sort of journey they've been on to get to that stage where they feel like they need to carry a knife. But I think one of the really key challenges in this area is, sort of as Jeremy raised earlier, getting the resources to a lot of the grassroots organisations and quite small sort of parts of civil society that will be, you know, best placed to recognise these situations early on and to identify at-risk young people. And I think one of the key things to think about in terms of the way the government implements the serious violence strategy is how it invests in some of those really small grassroots organisations and the people who are doing best practice, but who might not be, might at this minute not have a really strong evidence base for what they're doing. So I think it's been really positive to hear in the Youth Endowment Fund, for example, that there's an emphasis on supporting grassroots organisations to fund evaluations of their work and to build a stronger evidence base. You know, a lot of the best work at the minute will not have a randomised control trial or a you know, full evaluation. Some of the evidence they have might be based on case studies or just one-off relationships or you know, other things. I think trying to test which of those are the best interventions and then to try and sort of really, you know, have a test and learn approach to roll those out is the best way that the government could be approaching this.
I think it kind of implies, doesn't it, that from my understanding, that the majority of young people, particularly black young males and boys, walk around with a knife every day. I don't believe that is the case, of course. There's obviously going to be a small minority that believe they need to do that for the reasons they've set out. So I think I'm keen that we don't give the impression to society that the majority of young people, particularly black young people, walk around with a knife every day, because I don't believe that is the case. I've not seen any research which shows what proportion do carry a knife, but clearly that's the perception and the explanation given by young people that do carry a knife. So that's obviously valid, and we have to listen to that. I think the important thing, it seems to me, with all the strategies, is are young people given the platform to get their voices and feelings and experiences across to government at local level, in schools, in local authorities, in care? Are they really listened to, and are they given regular opportunities to kind of say how they feel about what's being done for them, with them, to them? And I think that's, it seems to me, whatever strategy government comes up with, we've got to make sure that young people have got a strong voice, channels to communicate, either indirectly or directly, with the powers that be, locally and nationally, and then that is a regular, systematic communication. They may not want to talk to the police directly. They may prefer to talk to a youth worker or good organisations like Sheldon's who can work with those young people. Whoever, as long as it's clear how they're communicating and where they're communicating and their voices are being listened to and heard and responded to, it seems to me is really important.
Thank you. So if we move on to the next question, which Husna will or Theo will ask, actually.
Yeah. So this is to Jeremy Crook. And I want to ask, some people perceive knife crime as only being an issue in larger cities where it mostly affects young black men, both as perpetrators and victims. Do you think this is an accurate perception? And regardless of whether you think this is accurate or not, how do you think this affects strategies and providing of services and resources?
Thanks. I think, the College of Policing produced a very succinct briefing which sets out the data and explains the proportion of gang-related knife crime, for example. I think it's only 5% of overall knife crime. It's a low proportion, albeit that element is often more serious in the sense of the consequences in terms of serious harm and deaths. But overall, it's a smaller proportion. But it's obviously very serious at what level it is. I think it does impact and impinge on how we think about solutions and how we think about engagement. We're already dealing with a society that perceives some young people very negatively, and black young men are having to deal with a perception, a stereotype that is very, very negative, whether it's the hoodies, the aggression, being lazy, prone to violence, prone to drugs. Those things are prevalent generally, let alone when you bring in crime and knife crime and those important aspects. So I think we've got to keep challenging ourselves to look at the strategies and what's being done and the content of those and how they are informed and what's the thinking behind them. And I think there is unconscious bias, sometimes there's direct bias in how we think about who we're trying to support and help and what the remedies are and the solutions. And if they're not well informed, we don't challenge ourselves in the way we think, both in government and outside of government and in communities, at all levels. We've got to challenge the perceptions and the solutions and make sure that they are sensible and effective. But that means checking, doesn't it, all of the time, what's actually working.
So can I repeat a part of the question? So you mentioned that it's a negative interpretation, but the question is regarding whether it is an accurate perception that it mostly affects young people. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the data suggests it's not an accurate reflection that it's just young people in urban areas. It seems to me there's a national issue across a range of communities. Clearly, in large cities where there's more deprivation, we've obviously got higher incidence of that. But the data suggests that there's a low proportion of gang-related knife crime, for example, is a very small proportion of the overall knife crime or with sharp weapons. So that's really important to understand that. And I think what we all want to make sure that we use the data that is available and explain it and don't exaggerate it and take it and make it, give a picture that's inaccurate and leads society and communities to view one group of people or a very narrow group of people as being responsible for all of this crime across the country, because that would be inaccurate.
Thank you. So the next question, which Jodie will ask.
My question is to Matthew Scott. Kent has seen a very large increase in knife crime since 2010. How will the recently announced extra 1.5 million to Kent Police be used to combat knife crime?
Sure. If I may, I just want to pick up on the point you raised there about the ages. We did a big data analysis in Kent of violent crime over the last 15 or 16 years. And what actually, the biggest trend that we've seen actually is not violent crime being a young person's game, as it were. Actually, the biggest change we've seen is around the number of women who are becoming involved in violent crime as a proportion. But actually, it's more intergenerational. We're seeing more people in older age categories now being involved in violent crime. Yes, our biggest age cohort is the age 20 to 25, but actually the number of people who are being involved in forms of violence, perhaps because of issues like domestic violence and sexual violence, are being reported to the police more. Actually, it's diversifying the age profile of people who are being involved in violent crime and being caught by the police. With regards to the Kent statistics, yes, it was a large percentage increase. In Kent, knife crime is very low. The numbers as a proportion of the crimes reported are very low, but that doesn't mean that we are complacent about it. So we have received in several £1 million recently. We've received £1.7 million of search funding. The police have been using that to do more enforcement activity against county lines gangs, against people we know to be committing violent crime. So very intelligence-led, targeted action, which has led to a number of warrants and a number of arrests. And in the last few months, we have seen knife crime fall by about 15% as a result of some of that activity. But crucially, what we've just agreed this week is how we're going to be using the funding to prevent that from happening in the first place. And some of the schemes that the panel have already talked about around the wraparound care for young people to prevent them becoming involved in violent crime, but also some of the support that we would offer to people who are in other age categories is improving as well. The important thing around the statistic that was reported in the media, sometimes statistics are probably not the truly accurate picture of what was going on, because we don't know the full picture of what's going on. We only know what has been reported to the police. We know that in and amongst that statistic, that wouldn't just been knife crime. That would have been crimes involving shards of glass. That would have been any sharp object, not just knives. And it will have included crimes in a domestic violence context too. So we are taking a very comprehensive look at everything, making sure we're identifying the right response, not just a knee-jerk response, and that we will continue to do that to make sure that we get the right balance between prevention and enforcement going forward.
Thank you. So thank you, Matthew, and I'm now going to pass on to Susie to ask the next question.
My question is to Iman Haji. In your evidence regarding the rehabilitation of knife crime offenders, you stated the government's efforts to rehabilitate offenders are largely ineffective. So I just wanted to know why you think so, and if you could expand on that idea.
I think if you just look at the reoffending statistics for young people, you all know that something's not quite right. Nearly 7 in 10 children will reoffend within a year of release. And that doesn't take away from some of the fantastic work that's been done to reduce the number of young people in the youth custodial state. So we've seen in the last 10 years 70% reduction in the number of young people that we have in prison. And at the moment we have, I think, about 800 young people in prison, and that's the equivalent of a secondary school that you guys go to. But the problem is that we have a core group of young people with very complex needs in a system that wasn't created to support them. And we were saying in our response that the current strategies aren't taking into account those complex needs and responding to them accordingly. So we know, for example, that a high percentage of the young people that we have in the justice system have suffered a traumatic brain injury. I think in our statistics we mentioned more than 65% of young people have sustained a traumatic brain injury. Even more have suffered adverse childhood experiences. Nearly 40% of young people in the youth justice system have been in care, compared to 1% in the general population. And one thing, or a few things that we need to know about trauma and how it affects our brain and the way that we respond to anything is that, one, when young people sustain trauma and adverse childhood experiences when they're really young, that can stunt their brain development. And so you have a young person who's presenting to you as 15, 16, who has the developmental age of somebody who's 5 years old, because that's when the trauma occurred to them. And then we're going to them and we're telling them this is how you write a CV, or this is how you get a job, and we're not making our response context specific to that particular young person. And another thing that we should know about trauma is that when any of us are in a dangerous situation, our survival responses are turned on and the higher levels of our brain are shut off, and the only part of our brain that's really working is the part of our brain that's in charge of fight, flight, freeze. And for young people who sustain trauma, that's their state of being. So when we go into prisons and we're seeing that young people are being told you have to do 30 hours of education a week, let's leave aside the fact that more young people are probably spending 22 hours in their cell a day. Those who are being told this is what you need to do for education can't access that. And so we would say we need to have a trauma-informed approach, because neuroscience, for example, tells us that unless a young person feels safe, they're unable to relate to whoever it is that they're interacting with, and unless they're able to do that, they can't access the higher levels of their brain that are in charge of decision making, that are in charge of reasoning, and those are kind of the things that you would need to be able to put in place in order to respond to rehabilitation initiatives. So in terms of what we would propose, we would ask for a trauma-informed prison system, and that would require us being able to support young people to help them feel safe. But of course that requires a whole system investment, because every person who's working in prison then would need to be able to be trauma aware and know that, one, how trauma presents itself in behaviour, and also know how to respond to those young people in a way that helps them feel safe and not make them feel like they're in danger. And that will then allow the young person to be able to relate to that professional, seeing them as somebody who's there to support them rather than somebody who's there to threaten them. And it's only when we have those systems in place that we can then kind of tell young people this is maths, English, science, or this is how to write a CV. And hopefully we hope, if that's in place, that we would see a decrease in the number of reoffending stats that we have at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks. So for the next question, I'll invite Bailey Lee to ask that.
So the median stay for a child in youth custody is currently sitting at 87 days. What effect do you believe a custodial sentence has on a young person's life once they're released from that sentence in prison? If you want to kick off, Matthew.
Yeah, sure. I think that given the circumstances of the offence, custodial sentences are appropriate. They should always be considered one solution. But I think we need to make sure that we're looking at things in the whole. I think that the panel has quite rightly identified things like a trauma-informed approach. Do we know enough about this young person that we are presenting to a custodial environment, and are we tackling the root causes of it? I don't think that we are at the moment, because I think we have a very fragmented system, and I think that's why, as Iman quite rightly points out, it's we see high reoffending statistics, whether that's because youth offending teams can't be as effective as they want to be, whether that is because community rehabilitation companies and probation aren't sufficiently engaged enough or doing the right thing, or they're disjointed, or the fact that the setting that they're in is just not conducive to reoffending and rehabilitation. So I think that there are a lot of things that we need to look at in this area, and I hope that whoever is the Justice Secretary in a few weeks' time will take a look at this in its whole approach to make sure that we are absolutely punishing the crime that needs to be punished, that victims and witnesses can have confidence in the criminal justice system, but actually that we're not just, as I said earlier, putting people in a cell for 22, 23 hours a day and leaving them to rot effectively.
I would kind of just add on that is that we know that short-term sentences have higher reoffending statistics than other sentences, whether we look at men, women or children. And that's partly because short-term sentences interrupt more or less every single one of the protective factors against crime. They affect employment, they affect your housing, they affect whether you're receiving benefits. So we would kind of support that presumption against short sentences where we should avoid them where we can, and hopefully that would improve and reduce pressures in the prison system and improve outcomes for everybody. Those on short sentences or would have been on short sentences are avoiding prison altogether, and hopefully that kind of reduced pressure and reduced levels of overcrowding would then be able to support rehabilitative interventions for those on long-term sentences, because they would actually be able to leave their cells and access what's on offer.
Yeah, and I'd echo a lot of that as well. I mean, one just example of how this kind of trauma-informed approach could work that we came across during our research was the example of a young man who'd been involved in county lines, but was engaged by a charity which, instead of viewing custodial sentences as being the answer, tried to view the sort of trauma and forms of exploitation that young male had gone through, and they worked to I think it's called an immediate safety plan, so to remove that young person from the sort of potential grooming and forms of exploitation that they're involved in through county lines, to kind of cut off their networks with the people exploiting them for a short amount of, ideally permanently, but also to kind of put them in a place for a short amount of time where they're uncontactable, and to start providing the forms of rehabilitation immediately from then. And there's lots of other charities and other services looking at potential alternatives to this and doing some really interesting work. So I think this is a time for innovative solutions and thinking a bit outside the box on that.
Thank you. So if we move on to the next question, which Charlie will ask.
The most recent youth justice statistics show that a quarter of all children in youth custody are black. Why is this, and what is being done to address this disproportionality?
I think very seriously the Youth Justice Board for many years, from my point of view, hasn't robustly tackled the issue of disproportionality. I think the system has done very well to reduce the number of young people in custody under 18 over the last 10 years. I think it's less than 1,000 young people now are in custody. I think 10 years ago it was 3,000 to 4,000. So we're doing very well to reduce the number in custody, but that hasn't. What's happened is it's reduced at a lower rate for black and Asian young people, particularly black young people. So, as I said earlier, they now represent 49% of young people in custody. So that seems to me we need to drive at that. Stop and search. The high number of arrests need to be looked at to try and keep young people out of the system, particularly from BAME backgrounds. But once they're in the system, the rehabilitation, the support, the learning needs to be that much more responsive to those young people. Culturally, it seems to me. And obviously what Iman has outlined there is obviously very important and very serious to be tackled and understood. But they do need to be given the right support and the right programs and interventions. I would say one point is we've got very few psychologists in the system from BAME backgrounds, developing programs, interventions, initiatives. There's an issue around staff itself in terms of how they reflect society, but I think we've got a dearth of psychologists in the system developing the right kind of interventions who understand the cultural diversity, understand the contextual issue around BAME young people, and hopefully can provide the best type of support interventions. I'm not saying that that's only can come from BAME individuals, but I'm just saying in terms of psychologists and how they're trained, and probation office and all the rest of it, is their training robust enough to now reflect the diversity, the ethnic diversity of the young people in the system, so they can provide the best and most effective remedies and solutions and interventions?
Okay, thank you. So if we move on to the next question, which Jack will ask.
A previous witness spoke to us about their police force's work using restorative justice. So my question to the panel is, do you think that restorative justice should be a more widespread practice? And possibly if we could start with you, Matthew, about maybe the possible work that you're doing in Kent around restorative justice.
Absolutely. I think what we need to do is understand what restorative justice is first, because there are misconceptions about it, and I don't think that actually some of the practices which go on are actually restorative justice, they're community resolutions. Restorative justice is now the responsibility of police and crime commissioners to commissions where it is victim-led. And restorative justice is actually it's about two things. One, it's about the victim, and two, it's about reducing reoffending. So I've commissioned a county-wide restorative justice programme which gives victims greater say and greater empowerment. For example, they will be in a facilitated setting where they can discuss the incident and discuss the crime with the offender once they've been sent to prison. They can seek an apology, they can hold the offender to account, they can use it as an opportunity to try and understand maybe why it was that they are targeted. And it can be a very effective tool for better supporting victims. So police and crime commissioners are leading the way in trying to inform on restorative justice and actually increase its usage. And there's some really good case studies about how some people who have maybe felt violated as a result of a burglary. One case I'm aware of where a lady who was burgled, she felt so violated that she was cleaning her house top to bottom 3 times a day. Once you met with the offender, discussed it with him, discussed the impact with that offender, she was able to get some form of closure and start to move on with her life and address that issue which it had caused for her. But actually, a few months later on, this repeat burglar who'd been in and out of prison wasn't presenting to the police again, so it was having an impact on reoffending. So I think it's important to recognise what restorative justice is and what it isn't, but actually what we're starting to see is the rollout more widely of restorative justice practices as commissioned by police and crime commissioners across the country.
Open it up to the wider panel.
I think Matthew's right about that. I think we'd all like to see more restorative justice. That's obviously, as Matthew's outlined there, good quality, well-resourced, because it does take, I think, a lot of professional input to make sure it's done properly. If the resource is not there, it seems to me that would be a poor quality solution. The evidence seems to me it can work, it is important, but it needs to be done properly and professionally, and people obviously need to understand the real rationale for it and what the meaningful outcomes should be. So I don't think it can be done on a low budget without the professional input. It needs to be done really properly by professional people who can work with the victim and obviously the perpetrator and make sure it works for both parties.
I just want to kind of build on that point about investment. I know that we heard last week from Superintendent Clive Davis and the great work that's been done in Surrey. I think the one thing I would add is that while restorative justice conferencing is great, I think we can adopt restorative practices and restorative approaches more generally. For us at Kalisa, that it means building young people's emotional literacy so that they're able to resolve conflict in a way that doesn't involve violence. I think we can adopt the principles underpinning restorative justice more widely. That's the only thing I'd add.
Thank you. So, as the last question, since we're forming a report of recommendations to the government, I wanted to ask you if you could very briefly describe one recommendation which you would particularly like us to take forward, each.
Can I go first, if that's all right?
Yeah, just very briefly, please.
I think quite rightly we focus quite a lot on the offenders and the reason why they offend and how we turn those people's lives around, which is absolutely the right thing to do. But one thing that I would always say, and I do it in every setting, is please don't forget the voice of victims of crime. And I say that for two reasons. One is that some of the individuals that we talk about, some of those people who are committing these violent crimes will have been victims of crime themselves, and in fact a high proportion of them will have been a victim of crime at some point. Repeat violent criminals have been a victim of crime at some stage, so recognise that bit. But actually, the voice of the victim and the voice of witnesses to crime need to be heard loud and clear in all of these things, because it can send a very poor message to victims of crime when they hear that the government is considering abolishing short sentences. We have to consider what impact that will have on victims of crime if they see something which has happened to them and they perceive that because there is no custodial element to it, that they're effectively being let off. So please don't ever forget the voice of victims and witnesses. I think they're absolutely crucial to all of this work, and it does direct alongside the work that we need to do to reduce offending and reduce reoffending as well. So that would be say, please remember victims.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think on this point, what I just emphasise is there's a real opportunity in a lot of the serious violence strategy for government to make connections across sectors and to really empower civil society to take a role in tackling youth violence. I think the closer we get to a position where youth violence is considered everyone's business and we have a common responsibility to tackle this, the closer we are to that, the better chance we'll have of solving it, and to sort of try and challenge some of these framing issues around how youth violence is perceived and who the perpetrators might be thought to be, but really to think of it as something which potentially affects all of us. And in that sense, for government to be working very closely in partnership, not just with sort of the third sector, but also with businesses and all sorts of statutory services to try and create that holistic approach.
Yeah, so if we could hear from you two very briefly.
Cool. I would say let's not look at young people as just within their risks. Let's not look at them as posing a risk or as being violent offenders. Let's look at what they can offer us and them as assets. And I would say that rather than just, as I said, not looking at crime in silo, let's see what we can do to improve outcomes for young people. We know that building young people's motivation, their self-confidence, their self-esteem works. So let's do that, because that not only reduces violence, the other outcomes include, as I said earlier, improved health prospects, improved employment prospects, and improved education prospects.
And the Youth Justice Board, youth offending teams need to work quite closely with the police and magistrates to reduce the numbers going into custody. The Youth Custody Service need to do a lot more to tackle reoffending amongst young people, and I think that really is about working very closely with young people, having the right support interventions, and stopping and reducing the reoffending rates as one part of this equation that's really critical to crack.
Thank you. So just to bring the session to a close, I'd like to thank all of our panellists for coming here and giving us some very valuable evidence. Thank you for coming, and this brings the session to a close. Yeah. Order, order.
The proceeding is currently suspended. The proceeding is currently suspended. The proceeding has ended.